Welcome to Spectrum Sundays. I am Megan Sinisi, a Master of Health Science candidate studying to practice as a pediatric speech-language pathologist. I am also Miss Central Pennsylvania and the founder of a nonprofit organization for autism titled From a New Perspective.
And I am Francesca D'Alessandro, a current master's student at University of Buffalo studying speech-language pathology. Additionally, I am your Miss Thousand Islands of New York State, serving my community through AAA appreciation and awareness for autism.
Everyone deserves to feel accepted and included in every space they walk in. Our series aims to inspire you to advocate for yourself and on behalf of your loved ones, and we are so grateful that you're here with us today.
Dana Young-Askew was raised and still resides in Virginia Beach, Virginia. She works for an international logistics firm. Dana is married and has 5 beautiful children. Her youngest son, Drayden, lives with autism. With input from Drayden's siblings, Dana has written a children's book about autism. The book, titled Come Meet Drayden, is unique in the fact that it's told from the perspective of siblings of a person with autism. Come Meet Drayden explores some of the day-to-day events and behaviors that might happen to children with autism. With writing this book, Dana hopes to expose children to autism. Her ultimate goal is for kids to start asking questions, for conversations about autism to start at a young age. Dana believes that dialogue about different disabilities and abilities has a direct impact on acceptance. So thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to have you, especially because your mission is very close and dear to our hearts. So could you start by giving us a brief resume of your experiences and your education?
Yeah, thanks so much first for having me. I love this platform and the work that you guys are trying to do here. And I wanted to, my platform really started with my youngest son, Drayden. He'll be 7 in the summer, but he's 6 now and he's autistic. He got his diagnosis around 25 months. So right when he was around 2 years old is when he got his diagnosis. And for me, it was really, really important to submerge myself and really learn as much as I could about autism, about sensory, about some of the things he was going through, how to help him now prepare for the future. So I really started doing a lot of research, reaching out to other parents, reaching out to professionals. And here recently with social media, I've really been listening to actually autistic adults, and that has been very much of a game changer for us. And so that's really been my mission. So I started my book, Come Meet Drayden, and it is a story inspired by Drayden, which is my son with autism. And it is told from the perspective of his siblings, which is really unique because it gives them a voice in this family dynamic dealing with autism. And so from there, I've done some speaking engagements, but I'm really committed to advocating and bringing awareness and talking about autism and all disabilities.
That's so wonderful. And as a parent, we're so proud of you for taking an opportunity to educate a broader public about your son's disorder and also about the family dynamic behind autism, because that I feel like that's a perspective that we often miss is people around the individual with autism. So I'm very excited to learn more about Drayden and your other children, but you used a few different terms. You used a little bit of identity first language, so saying autistic person, and then I also heard you saying person first language, so person with autism. So before we start our conversations, we always like to clarify and ask if there's one that you prefer and why that might be so, or just so that we can be respectful of that throughout our conversation.
Yeah, I love that. As I'm learning, I think I was taught one way with like person first language, but now that I'm submerged in this community, I'm learning from people who are actually autistic that they rather be labeled just as autistic. So I do my best to say autistic, but it's one of those things that I'm still learning and working through. So either or works for me, but I definitely am trying to listen to the community and really adhere to what they're telling me instead of, how I feel or what I was taught.
And piggybacking off of that, does your son have a preference, or is he at the age where he just doesn't really understand or care much about the difference?
Yeah, he's 6, so he really doesn't understand at all. He doesn't have that understanding, but I hope one day that he does understand and he can let us know his preference and we can make sure that is respected and we follow through with that.
Absolutely. I love that. That is so beautiful that you are allowing him that opportunity to speak for himself.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking about Drayden, could you share some of his interests or the things that make him the wonderful child that he is? We really love sharing about the stories of these children as a human and as a person, not just about their autism.
Yeah, so thanks for asking. Drayden is very, very stubborn. He's as stubborn as a mule, but he's so cute. So it definitely makes it hard when we're trying to assess like what he can do and what he can't do, because some things he just won't do because Drayden doesn't want to. And his special interest is monster trucks, Monster Jam brand Pacific. He loves them. He knows their names, the years. He is like in tune, 110% committed to those. Thomas the Train is another special interest. He knows them like going back 150 years, special edition, all the ones that have come out. He loves any body of water, whether it's the sink, whether it's the bathtub, the pool, the ocean. He loves water. He's really funny and sort of inappropriate, like laughing. He likes to giggle when people trip or those type of things. So he has a unique sense of humor. And he just fits perfectly. He's the fourth child out of 5 kids for us. So he falls right in his little lineup. And he's just really amazing. And he's a cutie.
He sounds so wonderful. I'm really looking forward to getting to know him more through the stories that you share with us today. So it's awesome to hear all of his different interests. But as you know, professionals that work with individuals with autism, and as a parent, you start to realize some things that may be his strengths, and then some areas that he may need extra support. So could you share a little bit about that specifically for Drayden?
Yeah, so with Drayden, although he has many, many strengths, he's an amazing reader. I always say he read before he could talk. He can read, he reads like 3 books at a time. He opens them, splits his page, 3 different books at a time. So he's great with letters, great with words. He's pretty good with numbers as well. And with that, he does struggle in some of those social behaviors, what's acceptable, what would be deemed as acceptable. Let's just put it that way. And so we still do struggle with meltdowns, or we have struggles at mealtime where he likes eating the same things and the textures and the smells aren't really easy for him. So that's definitely a struggle. And so education wise, he's beyond his grade level of 1st grade, but socially it makes it quite difficult because he surpassed a lot of his peers, but he needs those social cues and one-on-ones, and he definitely has to have, you know, a person or an adult with him at all times because he does flee. He doesn't respond to his name. And so those are things that we struggle with. So we definitely have to put in some modifications and accommodations there.
Right. And it's really great that he has your support through all of this and that you're so understanding, because that is such a common misconception with autism, is that a child with autism may struggle in certain areas of social pragmatics and just of those social contexts, but it doesn't mean anything about their intelligence.
Yeah.
They are highly intelligent kids who just need extra support in day-to-day interactions with others. But I'm really curious to know how writing your book, Come Meet Drayden, came to be. How were those discussions that you had with Drayden's siblings or your children during that process?
Yeah, so writing the book Come Meet Drayden was a goal of mine. I always wanted to write a book. I never knew it was going to be like this, but it was one of my bucket lists. And so it happened in 2020. And like a lot of America, I was sent to work from home during 2020. I work in logistics by trade, like we spoke about before, and I had a lot of downtime. And through counseling, because I go to my own personal counseling, my counselor was like, why don't we use this time to work on some things you wouldn't have before? Like, let's channel some of this anxious or nervous energy that you're having into something else. And so I did a couple things and the book came. So I was just jotting down and hit up sort of a roadblock because I sort of wanted it to be like more of a self-help book, like from a parent's perspective, like what my day-to-day looks like. And I asked the kids, I was like, you know, what would Drayden's siblings, I was like, what would you want people to know, or what's your experience been with Drayden's autism? And they just threw out so many good, valid points that I was like, whoa. I said, this book is changing, right? Like, I was so glad that I wasn't married to the outcome of a self-help book. I just was going with the flow and I appreciated the process. And so that allowed me to like swivel and pivot and sort of still have a book, still be about autism, but just a different perspective. And the more and more I thought about it, I thought it was more for us, right? Like, this is one of my goals. And also, it'll be something where the kids can look back years from now and realize like we validated their feelings, we heard what they had to say, and we documented it. And from there, it just grew. So many, the response that I have gotten back from so many actually autistic young adults who said they wished that there was a book out like this when they were growing up. And even siblings who have reached out that had autistic siblings 10, 20 years ago when everything was so much different than it is now. It's like, I needed this growing up because maybe I would have been able to explain it to my friends, right? Or explain it to people around me that I have an autistic sibling in their home, or even to feel validated, because it can feel isolating or like a lonely experience if you don't know anyone else who's going through this experience as well as you. So that's really how the book got started, and it just took momentum. I started off I'm still self-published, and started off just small on Amazon, and it grew and people requested it. And so now, listening to feedback, it's hard copy, and it's now in Barnes and Nobles here locally in Virginia, but it's on barnesandnobles.com everywhere. So yeah, that was sort of a little of the backdrop to the story.
That's fantastic. And I love hearing the process of how it started in the middle of the pandemic, and then channeling all of that extra time, or maybe that anxiety that we've all experienced over the past year, to make something that is so productive. And I also really love, like we said earlier, that you've involved Drayden's siblings, because a lot of families that I've spoken to, children or siblings of a child with autism sometimes feel like they're falling through the cracks just from their own perspective, because that individual may need so much more support. So bringing that all together into one story is beautiful. So could you also share and expand upon why that lens and that perspective from siblings of a person with autism is particularly valuable to help neurotypical individuals understand autism better?
Yeah, I think that perspective, because we don't see it a lot. I think that's why it's important, is to talk about something we don't talk about. That's how we start normalizing it. But also too, it's one of those things. I had a sibling of someone with autism, and they were much older than me, but they sent me an email and they said something along the lines of like, growing up, I never asked for anything, and I was a stellar student because I knew that my parents were so busy with my autistic sibling that they didn't have time for me. She said, or like, at least that's how I perceived it. Like, how dare I ask to go to the mall or for them to come to my soccer game because they had so much time spent with their autistic sibling. And so for me, I really took that feedback and that insight that I would never have had and ran with it, right? And it made my voice louder, of talking about this issue or this situation, because it's a real thing. Like, we think about how autism affects that child and how it affects the parents or the marriage, but we never look at how it affects that dynamic within the household of the siblings, because we have the context and the understanding to understand. And sometimes we're even confused about autism or any disability. So to have that dynamic with 2 and 3 and 12-year-olds who really don't have that language or life experience or ability to understand is really different. So I wanted people to start talking about it. I wanted siblings to feel heard and to feel seen. I'm really big, like, my platform is about representation. And I think we think of representation when it comes to color, which race really matters. But I also think that's important when we look at other perspectives too. So part of that representation is like, yes, the autistic sibling, yes, the parent's perspective is highly talked about as parents needing support, but even siblings, right? Like, that's a dynamic that they don't have the words for. They didn't choose this. They don't get to choose a lot of the therapy. So a lot of this is really out of their hands, and they're grappling with and trying to understand it the best they can. And like, my therapist had told me, children seem to think like the quote, the world revolves around them. They don't have that introspective ability to understand that things happen because sometimes life just isn't fair. Sometimes other things just cause things, and they think they are the reason why mom gets a divorce, why dad doesn't, they think that they're the reason. And I never wanted my kids or other kids with my voice to realize or think that autism happened because of them, because something they did or did not do, or something, that happened because of them, And so it was very important to me, if we don't have these conversations, they deal with things inward and it becomes a self-talk about them. And then when they're navigating tough emotions, it's hard for them to work through them because they think the autism is about them, not realizing that it's bigger than all of us, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that is such an important topic to speak about. And I feel like we could even go further in depth into that for at least an hour, because you're right. There's not a lot of information out there other than those firsthand experiences of how do you navigate some of those difficult questions and that your kids might have who are siblings. And like you said, they might not understand or truly be able to grapple with some of those internal questions or feelings that they're having at the moment. But I do believe over time, as they get older and they start to really understand the world around them, they will actually come out the other end so much stronger and so much more aware and accepting of people with different abilities or different disabilities or just differences in general, whether that be race, sexuality, gender. And speaking on this topic of diversity and inclusion, we have seen so many movements over the past couple of years really push to the forefront about diversity and inclusion and representation, like you said. So how do your children feel that they have learned about diversity and inclusion, even within their home life through Drayden's experiences? Do you think that they're going to carry that throughout the rest of their adulthood and be able to be stronger allies for different types of communities?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I love this quote, and I forget who says it, but it says, if you want to learn how to treat a child with autism, look at their siblings, right? And so for my kids, they hold Drayden the right amounts of accountable, but also give him grace. Because I think for me, it's easy to be like, oh, he doesn't know better, he doesn't understand. But my kids were like, no, mom, he knows what he's doing. And so it's a perfect, and it's also a learning lesson for me, because like I said, they know when to hold them accountable and when to extend grace to them. For me, my children are such good, solid human beings. And I think it's because they've had to learn and navigate compassion and understanding from such a young age, and they don't know otherwise, that even if they don't agree or they don't like something, they can understand and empathize with it and not be judgmental of it, right? So they have learned not to judge something before they know any or have any understanding or really know someone, because they know firsthand how dangerous that can be, right? And I also think too, for them, that's all they know, right? So they know my oldest, he was 5 or 6 when Drayden was born. So he knows a little bit different, but my other 4 younger ones, they're 11 months apart, and it's 2 sets of twins. So they sort of all grew up at one time in one big old group. So this is sort of like what they know. So when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's not really a subject for them, because for them, this is just everyday life, which I love. I hope one day that I don't have to label my book as like an inclusion book or a diversity book, because what I want is like that to be the normal for when our kids grow up. Like, we do such a good job now advocating and teaching them that we raise kind human beings. So I don't even have to be like, this is a diversity book or an inclusion book. So I really find that doing the work at a young age, and that's why I wrote the book on such a kid's level, because they're so like willing to understand and grasp information. And even now their friends are the same way. They'll come back and be like, Miss Askew, I think we saw someone with autism because they were spinning. And I'm like, okay, well, they may not have autism, but that's a good start, right? Not that the quote diagnosing people, but understanding those characteristics and seeing them for what they are, not turning a blind eye, not being shameful, not making fun, but seeing this and saying, hey, I can make a real life connection. I know someone who else who does this, and making that connection. So I think it's important, like that representation factor, and to also just bring quote unquote typical kids in and making sure they're doing the work just like I'm doing the work to make sure Drayden can fit in the world. And similarly, I hope that people who have quote unquote typical kids are doing the same amount of work to be understanding and accepting of all kids with all disabilities.
Yes, there's a few things I want to highlight that you mentioned. Your children being exposed to this as young little kids, they've had the experience of growing up with it and learning as they go, and not a lot of people have that opportunity. So that's a very important skill that they have that they can carry through to whatever career that they pursue or being parents of their own. So that's wonderful to hear. But it's also important to give a little grace to the people who weren't exposed and give them an opportunity to learn a little bit about it. And then maybe their opinions and their judgments can change if they're allowed the opportunity to explore it. So I think that's really wonderful, and that your children will be those advocates as they grow older for Drayden, and just knowing that, you know, you shouldn't pity people with autism, and you shouldn't say, I'm going to treat you different because you have autism, but just understanding that they may need a little bit of extra support or some accommodation. So it's not about treating them different because of their autism. It's about just coming from an accepting, kind approach to make them feel more comfortable. So we also, you touched a little bit upon the misconceptions that come about with ideas of autism spectrum disorder. So you said about spinning. Well, it could indicate autism, but not always. So what are some important things that you would like people to understand about autism, and maybe clarify some of the misconceptions that are out there?
Yeah, I think the main thing is if we believe and understand that autism is a spectrum. And I think that's really where we can start, knowing that one child with autism isn't going to look like the next child, and that it's a spectrum, and you can fall anywhere on that spectrum, and it can look very differently. Some things look alike, some things look differently, but it's all to be embraced. And like I tell people, just because you've met one person with autism doesn't mean you know everyone with autism.
Exactly. And we talked a lot about how some of these conversations occur with your children and young people. But when you're out in the community interacting with just the general population, and there might be a meltdown, or maybe he's just upset about something that goes his way, doesn't go his way, or maybe there's just an unusual or atypical interaction because he still is needing support with those areas. How do you have conversations with the community when they approach you about certain things, if that happens at all? I know in my professional life, when I would go out with individuals who had autism, I would get a lot of questions from just the general population when we'd go shopping. Sometimes customers would ask, oh, hey, why is that person doing that? And having those conversations, I think at first I was a little shocked because I thought, oh, maybe it came from a negative perspective. But then I realized I think they're just really curious, and this is an opportunity for them to learn firsthand what this person with autism is experiencing right now and how we can help support them. So I was just wondering if you've experienced that at all with Drayden.
Yeah, I'm very firm in my approach. I'm a very upfront person. So I have had times where people stare and I ask them what they're looking at. But I do know my approach is a little bit tougher than some others. But I do understand, and I have learned that some people ask because they don't know, right? Like they truly, truly don't know. And as much as I know because this is my life, some people don't know. So it's always finding that fine line of like when people are just actually curious or they want to know more, and when people are just not tolerant, right? And so for me, I always think it also goes back into that representation and that early exposure. And I think if we continue to raise another generation, right, like it's sort of hard to change people once they've established identities and who they are and what they believe and what they think. Not saying impossible, but it's a lot harder. So I think if we commit to that time spent on this new generation people who are still newly being molded, who are very impressionable, who are sponges, who are taking in information, who's ready to give love and take love. I think that's really where we do the work.
Yes, I definitely believe that the more exposure at a younger age is better for them to consider those differences and be more empathetic in their approach and more kind in their approach to interacting with people that are different from what they may experience as a human. So we were talking a little bit about how these are important conversations to have because autism presents itself in many different ways and at all different kinds of times. So let's say you were in a grocery store and Drayden may have had a behavior that is perceived as negative or perceived as different. We understand as professionals that typically behavior is a form of communication, right? So they're trying to get something communicated or their behavior is manifested because of something else that happened. So that's easy for us to understand as professionals, but it's also critical to share that message with anyone who is unfamiliar with autism. So could you share about maybe some of the behaviors that Drayden typically presents with and maybe some tips for parents or just a passerby, how they can respond to those behaviors appropriately and in support of that individual?
Yeah, I think Drayden, he does sensory overload. So grocery stores, Walmarts, those type of things are always hard for him. And when I looked at, like you said, instead of looking at it as a meltdown or a tantrum, really realizing that he's trying to tell me something that is just too much and he needs to go. And he doesn't have the words or the patience or the time to get that all through to me. So it just comes across different than what I was taught to communicate or what I was taught is acceptable. So I always would say just realize that every action or behavior, like you said, is some type of form of communication. And I think when we look at it like that, we can learn so much more. So now, and even with me, I've learned that although Drayden doesn't quote unquote speak, he understands that he can hear me. And so before I was like, well, he doesn't speak, so I really didn't speak too much to him. And so when I'm just driving him around places, taking him in and out of stores, throwing clothes on him, like I know I'm bringing him store to try on clothes to get him ready for like his summer wardrobe. He has no idea what's being done to him. So what I've really learned is to prompt him and to give him cues and let him know like, hey, Drayden, we're going to one more store. And even if he doesn't respond or he doesn't say anything back to me, I know that he can hear me. I know that he understands me. And it just gives him a little bit of prompt and know that he's not just being dragged from place to place. So that's really been important for me, is really just having those conversations with him, even if he's not responding the way I would expect or have been taught, or not saying, okay, he sort of hears me. And then also too, it's a give and take. So navigating when he gets to those points where I can tell, okay, it's too much. Like, yes, I may have planned to go to 6 stores and go to Starbucks afterwards, but if he's done after 2, like, let's not make it more than what we have to do. So I really think that listening to your child and just understanding their form of communication has really been important for me.
And I love that example that you gave of having that extra support visually or just cues and reminders. I was actually listening to the Autism Helper podcast, and they were talking about can't do versus won't do's and managing some of those challenging behaviors. Because sometimes when children just need additional prompts and visuals and cues about their schedules and transitioning, that's not a won't do. The child really does need that extra support to be able to transition or to be able to keep track of their schedule versus them refusing to do it. And I think that is an important thing to clarify. And that example you gave is perfect. But switching gears to more of you as a person and your personal life and your professional life, we talked about acceptance and inclusion and diversity and representation, all as a lifestyle, something that we should embody and embrace intrinsically. And I think really as a society, we will get there. But I'm just curious to know how that has shaped your life personally and in the workplace.
Yeah, I think it's always a big subject for me. And I think because my son does have a disability, and then also with the intersection of race, us being Black, that is always something that I have a heightened awareness about. I was always aware, of moving through and navigating being Black, but then once Drayden had a disability, it made me aware of other people that may have disability. And so for me, I'm always advocating. I'm always looking for people. I'm always telling people that they might need accommodation. So I'm definitely also always listening. I think through this whole process that I've learned that I'm not done learning. Like I've done research and I've learned a lot and I've came a long way, but things still change. And so I'm just committed to learning and growing. But I think really for me, even just in my personal life, even on sports teams, really, when my kids were playing soccer, just asking the coach, like, hey, do we have, some type of inclusion plan for what happens if someone comes out here and they can't run the whole time, or, they are in a wheelchair? Volunteering for the Special Olympics was very important for me, and having my kids there, because I wanted them to be exposed to see like they can still do things. It just might look a little bit different. So for me, it's just given me a heightened sense of seeing like where I can advocate, where I can use my voice, where I can stand and help, and really asking those questions, really prompting people. Because sometimes if it hasn't been your experience, it's not that you don't want to or you're resistant to it. You just don't know, or, you're unaware, right? You're ignorant to what's going on and what other people may need, or, so for me to be able to not be disabled, but be able to stand along a community of disabled individuals and help amplify their voice, continue to ask questions, continue to have uncomfortable conversations, continue to bring that heightened awareness, and make sure things are accessible to even little kids, but also adults too, as they get into the workplace, as they want, full-time gainful employment, to not be underemployed. So those type of things, housing and things are just, things I pay attention to when I go places, making sure, 5 years ago, I would never pay attention to something was like wheelchair accessible, right? Like it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me if someone was a jerk and parked in handicap parking that wasn't handicapped, right? Like I was like, oh, they just want to go fast. But now I understand. So for me, it's just those heightened awarenesses and situations, and really just using my voice, right? Speaking up where I can, because I understand the importance of, like, when I look at being Black and having allies that have that privilege, that use their voice to amplify mine. I understand now being on the other side of not being disabled, but standing along disabled people and amplifying them. So, yeah.
Right. You touched upon a very important and crucial point in advocacy, and that's allyship. So we can accomplish so much within our own communities, but by spreading our wings and getting other people to invest in the mission together, then it's not only the people that experience a certain type of lifestyle, then you're opening up a door for other people to advocate for you as well in whatever space that they belong to. And I also love that you are having conversations about intersectionality, because many people typically think of autism affecting young white boys, and that is not the case. It is so much more broad than that, and we need to know and be looking for it in different colors and different races and different communities, so that we can connect those people with the resources that they deserve, and then that way that they can fulfill their full potential. So thank you for having those important conversations and making the connections between your own experiences and paralleling that with how it might be similar for people with disabilities too. I think that that's really, really important conversations to have. So we will continue to support your mission in any way that we can to help amplify your platform. But as we're wrapping up today, we've touched upon so many important messages. If you could leave our viewers with one overarching idea that you really want them to take away from this conversation, what would that be?
I think the thing is really to understand and to leave yourself in a place to be teachable. I think that sometimes we as professionals, like we go through school, we get trainings and we want to affect so much change, and we want to do exactly what we've been taught. And then when we get into these communities, we realize some of the things we've been taught isn't quite effective, or can be offensive, or sometimes it's outdated, right? Or it doesn't work for the community that you're in, right? And so it doesn't mean that you're wrong or anyone's right, that you don't have good intentions. But I think when we remain teachable, we continuously learn. And to just understand, and also too, for me, is one of those things. It's like you're allowed to change and grow. And so something that you may have believed or stood on a platform before and said, I don't agree with this, or I don't believe in this, or I think this is harmful. As you experience things, as you learn, as you listen, you're allowed to go back and change and be like, hey, at one time I believed this, but after this experience, after learning through this, after talking through this, this is now where I stand. And that's okay. That's okay. You're not married to the idea as soon as you say something like that's it forever. So I really think that is just to remain teachable, to continue growing, and to continue listening, and just listen. I think you learn so much about like how to be a good ally, how to be a good parent, how to be a good friend to someone who may have an autistic kid, how to be, a good friend to someone with autism, when we remain teachable and really learn. Because if we ask people, they can let us know what they need. So I think that just remain teachable, really remain teachable.
I love, love, love that message, because it transcends every issue that really is going on in our world right now, regardless of what movement it is, and just in our everyday life. And as people, we should just be adopting that habit of constantly just trying to be 1% better the next day, or better than you were before, because really what it's about, and especially as professionals, we are trying to further the success of the people we are supposed to be mentoring and teaching. And it's not necessarily about us. So it's okay to admit when you're wrong and just move on from it. Don't get hung up on it. Learn, actively listen to what those needs or wants are, so that that person we are trying to teach and coach can have the most success in their life and feel comfortable too, so that they are on their way to living to their most potential. But as we are wrapping up, what are some of the events that are happening in your life that you would like to share with our viewers?
Yeah, so April is ending, and that's always a very busy month, but I'm happy. I love to amplify and talk about autism and bring awareness, and also create funds, because that's how we keep a lot of these services available. But right now, I have my book, Come Meet Drayden. It is available at Barnes & Noble, and also on Amazon for people who may not live within the United States who want to order the book. And then I do have 2 candles, which is Acceptance and Awareness. They are a special small collection that I have. I partnered up with one of my good girlfriends. They're hand poured in Virginia. They're soy. They're natural. They have a wooden wick. They burn for like 55 hours or so. And Awareness and Acceptance, I played off the names for Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. A portion of the proceeds do go to an organization that I know personally that's committed to doing the work, who's advocating for kids, advocating for their families, standing in the line with them, helping them with IEPs, connecting them to services, really being there. So I wanted to figure out a way where I was able to give back. So a portion of the proceeds from those candles will be going directly to that organization. It's called Advocating for Kids. And the candles can be found on my website. Is myautismcandle.com. Those really will help get other family services that really helped me. And so, yeah, it's a physical little token. When you light your candle, just remember who you're lighting it for, and it has a little blank line. You can write who you're lighting your candle for.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing for the community, for continuing to adopt and adapt and grow through this experience. We've really enjoyed getting to know you and your family a little bit through your stories, and we are so excited to share this with our viewers. So if you enjoyed this episode and you're watching and you would like to learn more about Dana's projects, please make sure to visit her website at myautismcandle.com. And you can also follow her on Instagram at Come Meet Drayden, and follow her on Facebook at facebook.com/Come Meet Drayden. Thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you for having me. It's always something that I'm passionate about speaking about and connecting with other families. We didn't talk much about community, but community is important to me. And so I really hope everyone just finds community, because this is hard, but when we stick together, we can get through this a lot easier. So thank you for having me, and thank you for this platform. And you guys continue to do the work, because the community needs this. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. We will see you next Sunday. Thank you for listening to Spectrum Sundays. We are your hosts, Miss Central Pennsylvania, Megan Sinisi,
and Miss Thousand Islands, Francesca D'Alessandro. Please make sure to subscribe to our series and follow us on social media to stay connected to autism professionals and self-advocates.
And just remember, true impact is accomplished through active listening and exploring the world through a variety of perspectives.
Join us next week on Spectrum Sundays to help cultivate a community of inclusion, appreciation, and acceptance around autism.